the theories of how electricity works. You know, there's still questions about what's moving towards what, and you know.
Does that mean that Tesla was correct about free electricity for everybody if we can just harness?
I mean, there's a lot of ground potential out there.
So.
Okay, so here's the deal with this interview. Dave Browne and I go back a long ways, and our families are very close. And we rarely have a chance to really do anything work-related together. I happened to be back in Kansas City recently, and the house we were in had a green screen. So I said, hey, let's just do an interview for fun and sort of banter. So if you want to know some more technical details about Browne Amplification's products, they have plenty of that stuff on their YouTube page. And we were in a house that had like a really old creaky floor above it. So my kids were jumping around. Thankfully, his kids weren't there. Otherwise, it would have been even louder. So I do apologize for the noise. But here we go. Me and Dave talking.
Dave Browne.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining me on Gear in a Movie.
Love it.
This is round one of hopefully many to come. We'll see. I just don't know if people like me.
Well, I don't either. Give it time.
That's really the reason I had you on, because I felt like maybe Dave likes.
No, I mean, I like you.
Okay.
But I mean, I like, as far as speaking for the mass populace, I don't know that I can say whether they do or whether they don't. I feel like time will tell.
It's sort of reassuring. We've known each other since 1997.
It's been a minute.
You had long hair. I had long hair.
Mm-hmm. Do you regret it?
The long hair?
Mm-hmm.
I should, but I don't.
I don't know that you should. I don't. I regret things, but that's not one of them.
You had a fierce goatee.
Mm-hmm.
It was fierce.
Yeah, that was the thing back then. I mean, I could have braided leather into it, and it would have been okay. I mean, it was that long.
I feel like you did do that, though. I feel like
I don't know that I did.
You never did.
I should have.
Speaking of that, just while we're there, is there some connection between the T4 fuzz and just like T levels and men? Was that intentional?
Well, I think if you set it correctly, that it answers a call deep. And so, yeah, obviously, there's a guttural cry that you will hear.
It's chemical.
Yeah.
And
it's mystical.
Primal.
Yeah.
Those sorts
spiritual, maybe.
Well, knowing that, does that mean that jumbo frets are the best to put on your neck, your guitar neck?
If you like big frets. I kind of am in the medium jumbo these days.
Yeah.
I like to be able to get a couple fret dresses out of it before it needs a refret, but the gigantic, almost scalloped feel I can't play that light. So for me, like, there's kind of two approaches to a piece of gear. Either you're creating a unusual sound or an unusual guitar, an unusual piece of equipment that will stand alone and inspire and create its own thing and create a place for itself. And so that's really cool. Like, there's certain things like that. But for me, like, designing something that's really functional and usable on a broad scale, I would always test it in a live situation.
Yeah.
I always will test it in a live situation. And so, because to me, everything else is kind of meaningless. Like, you can, sit in your room and dial up your amp perfect, but then you go try to put it on a track, and it's like, oh, sorry, you can't have that much low end, or, So it was always trying to dial things in so that whatever musical situation I was in at the time, or the person that I was building for was at the time, that it met the need and fit.
Yeah. So when we talk about voicing, how do you look at it on the amp side and the pedal side, and more importantly now with your pedals, how does that inform where you're heading with your products and that sort of thing?
I feel like I'm just trying to make something that's going to be able to stand in the correct spot in a mix. Mm-hmm. You know, you need clarity, you need the ability to cut through. You know, sometimes a nice bump in mids will make a guitar stick out in a track without having to turn it up. But I'm just trying to voice it to sit nicely in a mix, I guess.
Yeah.
And kind of dial it in to where it sounds what I think would be ideal, with controls as close to noon as possible, so that, you know, intuitively you just kind of start out there and you're close. Yeah. It might be a little obsessive, but
no, I've noticed that about your pedals right away. The starting point is right up the middle, and that really helps.
It's part of the reason I don't do lots of extra switches and toggles and adjustments. I realize that stuff can be really cool, and I have some really cool Swiss Army knife gear that will do anything, right, in a situation, and that can be really fun. But for me, most everything that I'm building and designing is meant to be used live, and for me, in a live situation, all those things that can get misset or set not how I want them. Yeah. Not that there's a wrong way to set something, but, you know, you get it dialed in, and then you pull your pedal board out of your bag and a toggle gets switched, or, you know, things get flipped and it doesn't sound right, and you're in the frame of trying to play music live in front of people, not mess with your pedals. And so, you know, I always try to make everything so it's pretty obvious, a great starting spot and hard to mess up. Yeah. I don't know if that...
No, that's like a huge deal. And then so as far as diving in a little deeper on the T4, you have sort of a tone. How do you explain the tone knob on that?
It's still just a standard Big Muff tone stack. I just revoiced it to so that it didn't lose all the mid range. The Smashing Pumpkin scoop is really cool, but I never was able to use a Big Muff in a live music setting because it just would disappear.
Yeah, I think a lot of venues, there's actually almost like a phase situation on stage sometimes, or where if you introduce that tone, you're really losing. You can't hear yourself.
Right.
You know, it's
you have to turn it up so loud.
Yeah. Sounds. How do you approach the darker sweep on pedals?
I just try to make it so there's no knob setting where it doesn't sound good. I just try to kind of dial it to where I'm voicing things to where you could kind of set the knobs however and you'd still have a usable sound.
Is this because you're also a good cook?
I think that ethos carries over into whether I'm making a soup or a cocktail. I just feel like you start with the best ingredients that you can get, and then you put them together correctly, and then you end up with something that brings a lot of joy.
Are you also a clothier? Like, do you knit?
I have never knitted. I can sew.
You sew?
I'd have never made clothing, but I repair a lot of clothing. You know, if you need something, you make it or grow it or fix it or...
Smoke it. No, not smoke. Like,
no, I mean...
in the smoker.
Yeah, or whatever. I mean, I've always wanted one of those Gandalf pipes.
A Gandalf pipe. Yeah. You could make that.
I don't know. Probably should.
Okay, guitar straight into an amplifier, impedance and voltage into a first stage of amplification, and the difference between that and plugging guitar straight into a pedal impedance and voltage.
Wow. Well, I guess the simplest answer I could give is that when I plug a guitar straight into the front end of an amplifier that's designed well, the reactiveness that you get, I mean, voltage can be all over the place in an amplifier depending on what it is, but if it's, designed well and it sounds good, usually the reactiveness of the guitar is really special when you plug straight in. And when you plug into some pedals, if they have not been designed to recreate that or have that, sometimes you'll lose that, and that bums me out.
Yeah.
So, like that was the idea with the fixer, is like, if you've got a big old pedal board, a really good buffer gives you that the feeling of plugging straight into the first stage of a tube, and I like that sound. I like that feeling, and I miss it when it's gone.
Yeah. I've always thought of it as that first tube stage has such a sort of it's like it's inhaling the sound from the guitar.
Yes.
And a lot of times with pedals, it feels like it's actually kind of shunting or sort of truncating things with even with sustain or with whatever's happening in the signal. Well, the signal coming off the guitar is so weak, really, that I feel like the tube amplification, because it's the order of amplification is so great that it's sort of drawing that sound out. Is that? Am I stupid?
Is there? I mean, you're asking if there's a wrong way to look at something, and I don't think there is. I think that the theories of how electricity works, there's still questions about what's moving towards what, and
Does that mean that Tesla was correct about free electricity for everybody if we can just harness?
I mean, there's a lot of ground potential out there.
So, I think we've covered a lot of things. I will ask, as far as when you were dialing in the protein, did you have to think about mid-range on mid-range? Did you mid-bump? Did you have to kind of work with those two things to try to get the mid-range right?
Between the two sides?
When they were both on?
So the carbon is not a real, or the blue side of the protein is not a real mid-rangey pedal.
Right.
But the modifications that I did to it gave it tons of headroom. So it stacked really well with kind of whatever you put in front of it.
Yep.
The green side, I spent a ton of time getting the mid-range exactly where I wanted it, because that was more of a lead boost, and I love tube screamers, but they have too much, and I love ODR ones, but they don't have enough, and they have too much bass, and they have too much gain, and I mean, for me, I'm not dissing on that pedal, I'm saying for what I want, it was, really modified by the time it got where I wanted it to. Both the blue side and the green side were really modified to get to where I wanted them to go, and so yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and you had to kind of mess with the ingredients over and over again.
Yes.
Or just, so
it's very hard for me to stop tinkering with things. I will change parts and change parts and change parts and change parts. And, eventually I have people that I have in my life, you being one of them, who I will say, is this done? It's like when you've tasted the soup 16 times, you might need somebody else to come in and say, does it need more salt? I can't tell if it needs more salt.
What is your favorite soup? Mulligatawny?
I don't know. I love chili.
Yeah, it is good.
I love beef stew. I love chicken noodle. I guess I don't know.
I like soup du jour.
That usually is my favorite.
You guys should really get out and try some soup du jour. Just take our word for it.
Yep.
We've been around the block
Yep.
a few times. We've been to New York together,
Yes.
and usually
I think that's the first time we had soup du jour. It
seems
was at a very upscale hotel.
it was either that or the time we went to Italy. We've been to Italy as well.
Yes.
We've traveled. Look, you're talking to a couple guys who've been some different places and had soup du jour. So
More than once.
just, if you take anything away from this conversation, that's actually this.
Let it be that. Let it be that.
Thanks for joining. We'll see you.
Arrivederci.